Hello and welcome. Welcome, by the way, to Casual Friday. As I've mentioned to you, Fridays are casual, so I don't have to wear my lawyer garb, and I can just simply appear as a normal human being on our Fridays here at the office. I want to use this session to summarize what we talked about last night, and also to create a bridge to the more formal aspects of the entrepreneurship training to get you involved in the structuring of the companies themselves. So let me just simply briefly identify where we've been so that I can give you a roadmap to where we're going. I started off this entire entrepreneurial training from the standpoint of understanding this concept called integrational processing. And if you remember, the integrational processing component was the process whereby you're going to identify the relationship between you as a person with your personal identification, with the business that you're going to be creating, which I call the business identification, and then from there extend it into the marketplace for what I call the market identification. That's an integrational processing process. And the reason for that is because as you step out into entrepreneurship, you are really stepping out as an extension of yourself, as an extension of your personality into what you're going to be creating out there in the real world. So once we did that, I then transitioned into what I talked about in terms of the steps of the entrepreneurial process, beginning with conceptualization, going through its various phases, the different stages that we discussed in the last video that I shared with you, and of course in more detail in class. And then we ended up with the scaling of it, either through an ongoing system of innovation or even more substantially, an ongoing system of creating disruptive technologies and disruptive innovations based upon the particular field and business that you happen to be in. At this point then, what I'm now prepared to do is to allow you to transition into a position of starting to structure the company. And in order to be able to implement, if you will, those processes that went from the conceptualization to the stage, to the scale stage. Now, what does that look like? And for that particular purpose, what I wanted the opportunity to do, and I put this PowerPoint up here for a particular reason, I wanted to start not with the organizational structure, which we are going to talk a little bit about in this particular session, but I wanted to start with what the transition point is. If you remember, when we got through the stage of what I call the that process of iteration, where you have the opportunity to allow yourself to effectuate based upon the different alternatives available to you at a startup level, to where you finally have refined what I call here the product and market matrix, the connection between the product that you're providing and the market that you're serving and the product that you're providing for that particular market. And my comment that I want to make sure that you understand is that becomes your point of departure. It's a point of departure from two standpoints. It's a point of departure in terms of the value that you are offering to your customer or your client base on the one side, and it's also the point of departure with respect to everything on the marketing side, which represents what you are effectively saying about the product that you're offering. The product market matrix is providing the value contribution that you're actually offering to your customer or to your client base. And that is truly everything in business. There's going to be other stuff that we're going to talk about. And that other stuff that we talk about is going to be organizational, and it's going to be methodological and so forth. But all of that needs to be premised upon an underlying understanding of the value chain that you're offering, going from what you have promised that you would deliver to the market that you have identified as being the appropriate market for you to service, to the product that you in turn create for that market and then deliver to that market. That value chain, that matrix that I just discussed, it's important that it maintain the value chain for it to maintain integrity. And that's where all your value lies. Because when it comes to the value that you are offering, that value's got to come from the development of the market you serve with the product that you deliver. I've used examples, and I could use examples in class. Of course, I use lots. But for purposes of this video summary, we talk specifically, for example, now about Tuscan Gardens. Tuscan Gardens is an upscale product. It is intended to achieve an elegant lifestyle for the seniors who are honoring us by being in our communities. In order for me to be able to deliver, and once I have understood what it was that I wanted to deliver, I conceptualize a lifestyle that then gets integrated into the marketing materials, or said differently, into the communications that are going to be going to those prospective customers. When they buy in, by agreeing to become our residents, I've got to maintain at a different level the deliverable that will ultimately give them what it is that I'm actually promising them. That's the matrix that I'm talking about. The value chain cannot be broken, because when that value chain is broken, the line that is seamless from what you have promised to what you are delivering, if I break that chain, what ends up happening is I now no longer have a product that has intrinsic integrity attached to it. So, final comments on this. The value chain is the transition point whereby you go from the product matrix that you've created to the actual deliverable of the value chain that you're otherwise going to produce. The value chain ultimately also, by the way, establishes your pricing. And that pricing ultimately establishes your margin. There is obviously going to be a cost factor that's attached to virtually any business of both variable and invariable costs. But you don't get to the cost structure until you understand what that margin is that ultimately is being delivered, and that has to come from the value that you're creating for the public that you have in fact marketed to. Now, once I understand what that value chain looks like, I understand that the pricing comes from the margin, from that particular value, and that ultimately determines my margin. Then I can begin a process of implementation tools in order to be able to achieve that. So for that, I want you to take a look at the particular implementation tools. And I'm going to be talking about these particular implementation tools. Structure of the organization, number one, the standard operating procedures, number two, the processes and key performance indicators. Now, I'm not going to do all of those in this particular video because then it would just simply be too long a session. But I do want to go to the structure of the organization first and talk about that, because that's where we begin in this process of creating what we are now promising we're going to be creating. So I want you to take a look at this particular structure. Now, there's no particular magic in the way that I've structured it for you here, and there are so many different authors and speakers who have their own structures, but this works for me, and there's a reason that it does. So I want to go through this with you so that you understand it in the way that we described it with far more detail when we happen to be in class. We have two faces to your organization. And by the way, it doesn't matter if you're a one-person show or you're a substantial organization with 600 to 1,000 employees. It works exactly the same way. There's a customer-centric or customer-centered portion of your organization, and there is the enterprise face of the organization, which is the actual operation of the enterprise itself. And those are really two masters. They're not one. When you see the portion on the top, marketing and sales generates out of that value chain that I just discussed with you. When I know the position in the marketplace that I'm serving, I understand marketing is what that key is that drives it. And then, of course, there's a sales aspect attached to marketing. It's the value that I ultimately bring to the consumer based upon what I am communicating to the consumer. With that, I got to build it, and I have to produce it, and I have to deliver it. It doesn't matter if it's a tangible product or it's a service, but that's what I mean by production. And then ultimately, once I've produced it, I have to deliver it, which is the fulfillment function. You have a marketing and sales, you have a production, you have a fulfillment, And here's what I want you to understand about that. All of those are customer facing. Said differently, those are all about the customer. On the other side, you have those support mechanisms which don't necessarily serve the customer at all. The client of those items on the very bottom of that PowerPoint are specifically the enterprise itself. When I say OD, I'm talking about organizational development. That's where you house your human resources. That's where you house your training. That's where you house your onboarding. That's organizational development. You have an IT side, of course, the tech side, which is so very important now because there's so much more that you can do to scale an organization now than 15 or 20 years ago or the long time ago when I first started in business. The third portion is the finance and accounting. The fourth portion is the legal, which includes tax, compliance, regulatory, and so forth. And then, of course, you have your administrative support function. Those are those support functions that support the enterprise so that what? So that the enterprise can ultimately deliver the value killer structure of the organization. The margin, the value comes on the top side. It comes with the customer. It's the value of the margin on the top, and on the bottom is a cost structure attached to that. The differential between the two is, of course, what will be your profit. The higher the value, if you will, the higher the margin, and the more efficient the cost, the greater will be your profitability. So when we take a look at optimizing a business organization, a business enterprise, what we talk about is maximizing and optimizing the value of that which you're delivering to your customer client base while maintaining a very efficient organizational structure. So when we now move forward in the course and talk about how you achieve that and the types of additional implementational tools which will allow you to achieve that, just understand that when we talk about the customer, we talk about optimizing the customer experience. And when we talk about those operational components by which you have the chance and the opportunity to do that, we talk about issues of efficiency. So on the top, it's all about effectiveness. On the bottom, it's all about efficiency. The difference between the two is about profitability. So that's it for now. I wanted to just simply give you a transition from how we got from conceptualization of an enterprise concept down to the scaling of it. From there, I wanted to make sure that you understood that you don't go to organizational structure first. You establish what your value chain looks like and cement that for yourself. And then once you've done that, you create an organizational framework, if you will, skeleton, if you will, that you can then put meat on in order for you to be heavily customer-centric, because that's where your value lies, while creating an efficient organization to make that happen. That's it for now. Look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks for joining me.